Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Matters That Matter, a conversation series from Hendricks Chapel. This evening, we are delighted to have with us the Reverend Dr. Seretta McKnight. Seretta, thank you for your time and thank you for being with us this fine evening.
Thank you for the invitation, Dean Konkol. Always a pleasure to sit and chat.
Well, let's start, Reverend McKnight, from your journey to Syracuse. I'm just exceptionally curious, and I'm sure our audience is curious as well. What brought you to Syracuse University? Fill us in.
I chuckle when I think about it. The reality is that I had applied to several universities, and it was a wintry, spring, cuspy type day. What am I talking about? I was taking freshman English in my senior year of high school with Mrs. Marion Fleming, because Syracuse University had been in partnership with Roosevelt Junior Senior High School, the center of God's universe, Roosevelt, Strong Island, New York. And so what happened was my cousin, God rest her, Wendy, had taken me on a tour so I could physically see the campuses, if you will. And the first stop that we were making before we headed out to Boston and the Yard and all these places was Syracuse University. And I happened to be, we were coming up University Avenue. And there's absolutely nothing more majestic than to travel up University Avenue and unfold is the Hall of Languages sitting at the top. Meantime, there is about 6 feet of snow on either side of the street that was well packed in because clearly there had been snow. And folk were walking around in shorts and sweats and t-shirts and bubble vests. And I came cruising up with my cousin. We were driving up University Avenue, and it was the majesty of the Hall of Languages that got me to Syracuse. So that's the real story.
Well, so you come to Syracuse, and shortly after is the creation of the Black Celestial Choral Ensemble. And when people talk about Hendricks Chapel as being the heart of Syracuse University, I think of the BCCE as its soul. And 4 decades later, this incredible history, a living legacy of students over the years being engaged in gospel music. And you were there for the very beginning as its founder. Can you walk us through the founding of the BCCE?
Reflection is something. As a freshman on the campus of Syracuse University, the one thing that I found missing, because you have to keep in mind, this is the end of the 70s. There's a whole lot going on. The country's trying to come out of Watergate and that whole scandal and so many different things happening. And that was the year, a bicentennial year, if you will, for America's 200th birthday, the fall of 76, when I got to campus. And the first person I met on campus was the brother who sent me a letter, Barry L. Wells. And Barry became my quote unquote guru, if you will. He was the coordinator for the Office of Minority Affairs. I had a couple of different situations that had occurred as a freshman. One with my housing. You have to understand at that time, I was part of the largest class of color, or Black class, that entered Syracuse University. The campus was saturated. We were in extended housing. What does that mean? That means a double room was used as a triple room, and cots were added. It was expanded, that type of situation. And the thing I found missing during my experience there that freshman year, especially first semester rolling into second, was that sense of home. You're away from home, you're in a foreign land, quote unquote foreign, because of the experience of living with all types of folk around and the climate in the country. And even though I had some serious mentors, because that was my first introduction to members of the Divine Nine. Folk had gone to Roosevelt, were up there, Roscoe Lawrence, met Steve Edwards and them from the Bronx, because we go back to the summers and basketball and all that kind of good stuff, and Rachel Roston, the Deltas. I mean, it was not as though I was alone, but the reality was, BK, with all of the challenges, the one thing I found missing was a sense of home. a sense of camaraderie, a sense of quote unquote belonging. And culturally, when we think of home, especially because of the way I had been raised, God bless my dad, love my mama la, hi mama la, the gospel became imperative to get us through some hard times. And for me, the music always crossed all types of barriers and denominations. Music does, but this pure art form of gospel, good news. And so what happened, Barry Wells, I had chatted with Barry back and forth, a couple other administrators, and I was sharing. Well, Lawrence Ford was one of the first folk I met from Buffalo down at Brewster Bowling, because his homegirl Sheila was my homegirl's roommate, if you will, freshman year. And so what happened was that we all got to kicking it and talking, and everybody had the same type of, yeah, you know, that's true. And so this thing grew, if you will, in terms of concept. Barry also knew through Minority Affairs that there was Irvin C. Allgood, who was a freshman also on campus, who had a similar interest. And between Steele Hall and Hendricks, because you know how they are aligned, we had met one day during the spring after all the chit chat back and forth with this one, got to meet that one, etc. And it was between Steele Hall and Hendricks that we finally met. And then after we did so, we went over to the student center that spring, later that spring, that April, and that's how BCCE started. You know, the student center was the other end of Walnut from where the Office of Minority Affairs was at the bottom, if you will. So the student center was by Byrd Library, right across the street. We had our meeting with the Magnificent Seven, is who we ended up being. We're talking about Lawrence Ford, Irvin Allgood, Pamela Hayes, Cheryl Lane, Hermione JJ, James, and yours truly. And so I had invited everybody to the meeting. We did. We came up with our name, BCCE. I was the acronym queen back then. So here we are over 4 decades later. And BCCE is still doing the thing, bringing folk together, being the ambassadors for the university. If you want to know, did I have any clue or idea that we'd be sitting here this day talking about it, I'd have to say no, but I can tell you that God knew. And so that whole sense of camaraderie wasn't just limited to those of us with the experience of Christ and the experience of the music. But what happened, we became the only campus organization that you could find a little of everybody in, truly represented. So the Black Celestial Choral Ensemble, we had Caucasians, we had African Americans, Black folk, we had folk from the out. We had a cross section of the campus that was consistently represented. We had support from an awesome chancellor, and the rest, as they say, is history. There were some dynamic individuals that came along and came through there, and by the grace of God, we were able to build bridges between the hill and quote unquote the valley, the campus and the community. And that became very important. And that's how we became, if you will, ambassadors for the university.
Well, and you talk about reflection and history, and about, some people say history repeats itself, other people say history rhymes, you know. And when we think about the last 4 decades and the rhyming of history, the repeating of history, and the ways in which the choir has had its presence on the campus and, quite frankly, in the country and world, I'm curious, Reverend McKnight, especially as we celebrated, you know, the 40th anniversary of the BCCE just a couple of years ago, how do you see the presence of the choir today in a similar way to 40 years ago, and perhaps in a different way? What's similar and what's different as you think about these last 40 years around the presence of the choir today versus the choir 40 years ago?
Well, there's a whole lot that has changed and a whole lot that's remained the same. What has been consistent is the message of the good news, the gospel. What has changed perhaps is the availability in terms of there's so much going on in this technological age that folk are in so many different directions that perhaps when we started, we had that fall of 77. There was 7 of us in April. That fall of 77, we had about 100 folk. And of course, that's how it came up, where you would have to go through a pseudo process, if you will, and then folks weed out. And we stayed at 40, 50 people. The traveling group was about 20. When it was a local thing and testing or whatever, our schedules might have interrupted, then there was a traveling component, if you will. So in terms of the physical numbers, you're talking half that now, maybe about 30, 25, 30, 35 young people at a time with so much going on. But the good news that's consistent is that numbers never was an issue when it came to ministering, when it came to lifting the load, when it came to finding camaraderie, a commonality. One of the things that remains the same, or a semblance of, or a rhythm, what did you say, a rhyme? I wouldn't say that it's repeating itself, but yeah, the rhyme is that racism was alive and well back then. And we see it has reared its ugly head again on the campus. The difference now, when we look at movements like Not Again SU, the difference now is that you have a movement that maybe perhaps started on the campus in terms of equity or things that students thought were necessary, that has expanded into a worldwide phenomenon. What am I talking about? Racism is not new. The difference now is that folk understand and are understanding and are coming to the realization that our humanity is our common denominator. And when you look at the Black Lives Matters movement and you see our young people from every hue, every ethnicity, from all walks of life, because the straw that broke the camel's back was George Floyd's murder when everybody was home. So there was a double virus going on. We had Corona, and let me say for the record, beloveds, we will no longer think of Corona as a sunny day on the beach, blue water, blue skies, or a bottled beverage with a lime. But we will remember this COVID-19 crisis, how God shut it all down, not just nationally, but the world was shut down, brought to a halt. So what happened? Families were able to get back together again, have dinner. There had to be engagement. There had to be communication. There had to be relationship. And now with all of this technology, a man was murdered and the video went viral. And he was murdered by folk who were supposed to protect and serve. And that has been a cry of people of color, of Black folk, of African Americans for a long time. And people couldn't really fathom, because not the police, they're good people. Some are, right. But when these stories started emerging and when George Floyd happened, it was the humanity, the nerve in everybody, that common denominator that we share. You get sick and need a blood transfusion. I'll bet a fat rat against a funky monkey, you're not gonna go and say, well, what color is the donor? So it's the commonality. Now, in terms of Syracuse, Syracuse has always been on the front line. We protested when we were trying to get the University of Divest from South Africa. What do I find the same? I find that there's leadership similar to the leadership that was existing during my tenure there. Mel Eggers was our chancellor, and he had no problem meeting with students, talking with students, especially student leaders. And so you develop relationship. The thing that I was very pleased with is this chancellor now, with all the heat, all the upheaval. I can't tell you another time when a university has been engaging as much as under the leadership of this chancellor. What am I talking about? You know, BCCE, we have some of those activists that were part of Not Again SU. There were a few of the students who are members of BCCE. even when they went to the sit-in, and I was very disturbed when I found out children were arrested. But thank God for the chancellor and his team, they stepped up. Oh no, you can't be arresting children for protesting. The academy is where we develop leadership. The academy is where the discourse takes place. The academy is where voice is given to those who are supposedly marginalized, because this is the leadership that's being trained for the future. And Syracuse has a great history when it comes to leadership, engagement. I'm not saying it was all roses, but I'm telling you that overall it was a much better situation, especially when you talk about private institutions and you talk about the era. So here you have BCCE, still praising God, yes, still delivering a message of hope and faith, still bridging the gap between the city and the campus community. Let's look at it. Do you realize that there are, for example, even in the city of Syracuse, we have Tag BCCE, the alumni group, Tag BCCE membership. Bishop H. Bernard Alex, a BCCE alum, an active member of Tag. Danny Payton from Payton Temple, again, pastoring right there in the city and continuing relationship. You know it from when we, after the Martin Luther King celebration, how with the round table that you convene with Pastor Warnock of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, who's now running for the United States Senate. I mean, Syracuse has always had that ability to have a connectivity in the best of times and in the worst of times to be able to get through and still stand. So the evolution of BCCE, no matter in what form outside of the restrictions that may come when people start talking about religious freedom, what have you. No, the news, the music is still the same. It's more contemporary. God still gets the glory. There's praise, there's worship, there is the legacy that lives.
You mentioned Reverend Warnock and from the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, who was our featured speaker at our last Martin Luther King event in the Dome. And just months before that, the current students of the BCCE performed in Atlanta at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, and you were able to accompany them. I would love to hear, Reverend McKnight, what was that experience like that weekend in Atlanta? You were able to speak yourself at Ebenezer that evening, to see the current students of Syracuse University performing in the spiritual home of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr. What was that weekend like for you?
Phenomenal. Why? Because let's go back to the very first anniversary of BCCE, where we had Close Encounters of the Gospel Kind, and featured at that time the Gospel Ambassador, Dr. Melvin C. Walker, rest his soul, came up and hosted our very first anniversary. He was an international gospel phenomenon who I worked with as a youngster before I could drive to the radio station to broadcast simultaneously with him. So we had him come up. We had the Triborough Mass Choir of Brooklyn, New York. Why is that significant, McKnight? Well, it's significant because Thomas Dorsey, who is the founder, if you will, or who is the godfather of gospel music, if you will, who was a jazz blues artist who found it and meshed it together and came up with this thing called gospel with hymns, etc., in our African oral tradition. Well, James Cleveland, who took choirs and directing and soloing and contemporary gospel to another level, was his protege. He sang in Dr. Dorsey's choir. He worked with him. Now you have Bishop Albert Jamerson, who pastors at Pleasant Grove, but who is the president of the Gospel Music Workshop of America. Connect the dots. Again, Syracuse. So Atlanta. 5 years ago, we started this endowment, BCCE. Hats off to you, to Chancellor Severud, to that awesome team, Barry, everybody, to Rachel and that department. Why? Because we were able to complete that endowment in Atlanta, as we had envisioned when we started this campaign for Legacy Lives, and being able to make sure that BCCE is there in perpetuity. So how did I feel? I felt great. Why? Because Lori Kingsbury, our recorder, who ran into me on Sunrise Highway in Freeport, New York, after she had left the Nautical Mile, had been talking to the folks she was hosting from Europe, this choir, and was explaining about BCCE and us, and happened to pull up to a traffic light, and we were both at the traffic light, and she couldn't believe it. It was a God moment. And from then we got together, we crafted this endowment, and 5 years ago when we started, the culmination was always going to be Atlanta, because Dr. Willie, who was an awesome professor up there, one of the first African Americans, him and Dr. King were classmates at Morehouse. So when you look at that legacy and the fact that Syracuse University has the largest MLK celebration of a campus community in the country, then it just became a natural fit that we would embrace all of those components. And even though we needed a longer runway to get it done, we got it done. It was phenomenal. The young people connected the dots. When you can reach out and touch, when you can walk where folk walk, when you can see, Dr. King was a 20th century prophet. He's got a beautiful monument on the mall. The prophet is standing with precedence. He was the type of individual that, yes, children learned and read about, but to be able to experience Sweet Auburn, the old Ebenezer across from the Horizon Center, the new Ebenezer, and for them to be able to worship and to lift up God, to join friends like Jeff Roberson in New Life and Shamira Mighty, and then Kirk Carr, who was with us at CBT, the last CBT in 2017, came and boom, was part of that. I mean, it was phenomenal, BK. Think of the impact and talking to the children. I felt like some sort of, I can't say mama bear, gotta be great grandmama bear now. But it was an awesome, awesome experience. And those types of things only happen when you have partnership, when you have cooperation, when you have open dialogue, when you have communication, and when you have children, young people, I call them children, my kids, but when you have young people that have an open mind, heart, and a humanity to be able to want to serve. So all this was part of a vision for legacy to live. Legacy lives in our children every day. Look, when you think of the King Center, think about it. If it wasn't for Seretta, we would not be celebrating Martin like we do. But Coretta Scott King was one of those dynamos. Just like look at Ashley Brown. I can't wait to see what the current director of BCCE does. Look at the university, connect the dots. How we had all that camaraderie. How now, when I went to campus, thank God when Barry brought Evelyn Walker on. And I think it was Joanne over in HEOP, who was the other sister. Well, we didn't see folk like us. Now I can look around and walk different aspects of the university and be able to say that I can see my sisters all over the place. Meredith Davis, Marcel Haddix, Candace Campbell Jackson. I mean, just name it. Sheila Johnson Willis, Sydney Johnson, Ubutu Offing, Lavonda Reed, Rachel Vassell, Brittany Zaringa, all women in position. I mean, assistant vice president, associate vice president, I mean, chief of staff for the, come on, connect the dots. So BCCE becomes even more important, more relevant. Atlanta was that much more significant because it was the prelude to the time that we are living in now. But the reality is change is not coming, change is here. And we have the opportunity to be on the cutting edge, to be right out there, to be brave enough, courageous enough, to be able to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. So this is a time where Atlanta, the culmination of our commitment, phase one, in terms of BCCE and Legacy Lives, moving now to the next level. And we can all do it together because look, we will either all learn to live together or we will all perish. And so that's the good news. Why? And I get excited. I know, BK, I'm going over. I get excited because
we got all night.
Look at this movement going on. Shout out to my sister girl, Muriel Bowser down in DC, Black Lives Matter. I mean, just to have it printed out, and then to see that it resonates with the fabric and tapestry of America. So Jim Crow doesn't have the legs Jim had before. These are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Let me tell you something, their eyes are open much wider, much wider. National Action Network, Reverend Sharpton, look at the marvelous job he did with the Floyd funeral, with dealing with these families. But we must remember, they are families, they are people, they are mourning, there is grief. But look at how I'm so proud of him. You know, that's well, he used to be my big brother. Now he's just my elder brother. But I am so godly proud because I'm one of his founding board members for the National Action Network. You marched with the chapter in Syracuse the other week.
Yeah. Yep.
So connect the dots. Syracuse has oftentimes been center and anchor for progressive movement. And it should not change and stop now, even though it may have been the first institution to acknowledge that they had a problem. You can't treat an alcoholic till an alcoholic knows they've got a problem. Syracuse engaged that problem. And I take my hat off to.
For our viewers who are tuning in, as a reminder that for those that are watching us on Facebook Live this evening, if you have a question for Reverend McKnight, a comment, please feel free or just to say hello, feel free to put in your comments, and those will be sent on to us here as we continue. I'm curious, Reverend McKnight, to talk about the last thing you said about truth. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned South Africa before about truth and reconciliation.
Sure.
And one of the things we think about in terms of truth and reconciliation is that it also requires transformation and empowerment, if you will. And in this moment, there's lots of different things that people can do, in terms of advocating, in terms of seeking out, bringing about social justice. How does singing gospel music fit in to movements for social justice and for human rights? How does that work for you?
To really connect the dots, gospel music, if you go back to our oral tradition, it's rooted in the motherland. And then up through chattel slavery, when we were brought over here and the whole nine, the spirituals, quote unquote, emanated from that, from the long can't see in the morning to can't see at night days. It was in the fields with tobacco and cotton that folk were able through the music to get through. And then it also became a mode to communicate liberation. In other words, if somebody was getting ready to escape that evening, they might say, steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. And so what happened, the talking drum, and it became a communication. And then when hard times continued with segregation and Jim Crow, you had the blues. And then they say America's truest art form is jazz. Well, when you take jazz and put it with blues and mix and match, and then go back to some of the traditional hymns, quote unquote, and put it in a contemporary or a mixed flavor, you come with good news that trouble's not gonna last always. You come with good news that we come this far by faith. We're still here. You come with good news. Lift every voice and sing. So the gospel, oh, happy day. Look at God rest him, Edwin Hawkins. And that goes back to that Melvin Walker thing. I had the privilege of interacting with these folks when I was a kid and didn't really know. But thank God for the ability to always be a good student. I was even though I had to take 21 hours incomplete when we were starting the choir. Authenticity, transparency, it's important. So gospel music can lift you out of whatever dump you may be in, because it's all about the good news. And we need to be able, no matter what your God that you serve, mine happens to be called Jesus Christ. But whoever it is, there's a higher power, a higher authority, and you can be feeling so loved. Go on over to that hymn book and talk about when peace like a river
Mm.
attendeth my way, that it's well. And then going over to Jeff Roberson and hear the contemporary version of the same song. Or let's look at Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Gospel music is woven into the very fabric of our existence here in these states that Maya Angelou called the yet to be united states of America. And so it becomes important, it becomes relevant. It also, music can soothe, music can motivate. And I think gospel music is here to stay, even if we throw a little rap on it. The reality is the message is in the music. And when we practice what we sing, what we preach, what we do, then we will find that we are not just the agents of change, but that change is something that is inevitable. And now, after 400 and plus years, 401, since we first came to these shores, listen, everybody came here except the indigenous folk. Onondaga Nation was there before the university and everything else got there. I mean, that's another conversation, I understand. But the reality is that now, in this space, and I thank God for this space. I'm sorry to see all the death. I'm sorry to see all the folk who have succumbed to this virus. But at the same time, there's good news that George Floyd didn't die in vain, that Breonna Taylor is not going to be, a frontline worker is not going to be forgotten, that justice is coming. I mean, when Trayvon Martin got wiped out, folk were like, oh yeah, but with the hoodie and the whole bit. No. The reality now is you saw George Floyd. You thought about your own child. You thought about your own neighbors, your own families. Why? Because his skin color was different. Yeah. A police officer could pose and do. I mean, that is a sick mind when you have no humanity, even the most evil. At some point, you've got to have a regard because we're all in the image of the Imago Dei of God, who's still large and in charge. So we have to seize this moment and be able to show the world, lead the way. We need truth and reconciliation. We've witnessed President Mandela went from the prison house to the palace, presidential palace. I mean, we have the tools, we have the brilliance, we have the energy. And listen, Syracuse University is as good a place to start as any when we talk truth and reconciliation, when we talk about doing the right thing, when we talk about bleeding orange. Why? Because orange, O-R-A-N-G-E, orange, we have to have, our discussions must be open, they must be real and necessarily grounded in engagement for success, O-R-A-N-G-E. So that's the word and the missive for now. Look at Aunt Jemima, her history in the city of Syracuse. You know, it's rich. The moment is now. We need to seize it and move forward. And thank God for the children. Thank God for the children. Thank God for their ability to see the big picture. And even though the news might not be covering it like it was covered before, they're still protesting, they're still marching. And listen, it's around, it's global, international, just like this pandemic. And folk have to remember, come November, that there has to be a change. The squatter's got to go. The squatter has got to go. And we do that through the ballot box. We need to put our senators in. We need to elect our local representatives. Listen, let me share this with you. Sister Emily Moore from here, Roosevelt, everybody knows her, tennis star, etc. She retired after close to 50 years and then ran for the school board and won so that she could affect the type of change. What's my point in that? No matter what the age, we all have a responsibility. You know, I look at my grandnephew, Legacy Liz. He's Irving C. McKnight 4. My daddy was 1. My brother is 2. My nephew is 3, and he's 4. And then I've got my other nephew, Jahari. They all have their families. I mean, my brother, my sister-in-law, my mom, my cousins, my everybody. You know, you have to have some sense of a stable love for yourself and for humanity. And I'm telling you, I still have relationships because of the work of the choir that we have done, are doing, will continue to do, because of TAG BCCE, shout out the communications team, Lori, Gwen, everybody, and Jazzy, and Ronald Taylor, one of my kids, Sisters in the Struggle, was the face of the university for a while. You saw the beautiful pamphlet. Syracuse is equipped for now, but we have to be open. We have to understand that in seizing the moment, we have to be authentic. We have to be real. So we have to be open, real, and necessarily ground ourselves for success. Engagement, man, that's what it's about. So I thank God for having gone to Syracuse.
I appreciate what I hear you saying about in this moment where we're seeking clarity, where we're being compelled to act, and where we're building coalitions, you know, in the sake of change, in the embodiment of the choir and the embodiment of our campus, communities, country, and world. My last question, Reverend McKnight, is you're still very much engaged with our campus, still very much engaged with our current students. I'm curious, when you visit with our students, when you listen to our students, what are some of the things that you share with them? What are some of the things you hear with them? How do you provide them comfort, and how do you provide them with challenge?
You know, the beauty is when you see me, I've got a team. I've got Aaron and Urs that lift the arms. I've got a team of folk right there. In Syracuse, we have Deborah Nassau Schoening. We have Charlie Lester. We have Lori Kingsbury, who traverses up there regularly. We have Gwyneth Kingsbury. I've got a team of folk, Jazz and some others. I have a team of folk where we have crafted out, planning for phase 2 of since we've closed out 1, going to phase 2. That mentorship piece is important. What do I do when I interact with children? I listen. I want to hear what they say. I want to look through their lens and then be able to guide them with the wisdom. I don't want y'all to think I didn't earn every last one of them. With the wisdom that has come with being able to navigate these waters. I happen to have been blessed to come from a home where I grew up, the dolls I had looked like me. It wasn't until I got older that I realized they came in other shades too. So the thing that I encourage our young people today to be is courageous, committed, clear, and consistent. And then when you have those C's in place, you're able to interact. Everything is not going to be peaches and cream, rosy, all that kind of good stuff. But here's the trick, as I have shared with them. You may not be able to control what somebody says to you, how they insult you, but you can always control your response. And when you remember who you are and whose you are, and you remember the rich history and legacy that has enabled you to walk on a campus like a Syracuse University, and you connect those dots, because I'm a big proponent, if you will, of connecting the dots, of being clear, of being transparent, of understanding that white supremacy was real then, it's real now. That white privilege was real then, it's real now. Now, what? And this is the big but. The difference now is that these generations that are coming are looking through the lens of that could be me. Or my friend is so-and-so. If I'm with them, that could happen to me. And so all that I have been hearing over the years, it really has not been false information. It's been real. And so I appreciate their critical thinking. I appreciate the opportunity to engage with our young people, but most of all, I listen first and foremost to hear what young people have to say, to hear what their thought processes are, and to also keep them aware. You know, we always have folk that infiltrate things. You know, we had COINTELPRO during my era. The reality is that they may infiltrate, but the thing about truth that my parents always taught me is that truth crushed to earth is always going to rise. It's going to come around. My daddy used to say, if you can stand to wait, the truth is going to come. But while we are waiting, we are working. And so I appreciate all that. And then my mama taught me, Mama, she still teaches me every day, because the older I get, the wiser my mother is. Grace, dignity, self-respect, and always, if you don't have anything nice to say, I'm still working on that. She would say, don't say anything.
Well,
that's really it.
You know, you and I could speak all night, and I so appreciate you making the time to join us. We know that your schedule is really busy, and for you to make time to share with us the living legacy of the BCCE, a treasure that continues to impact our campus on so many ways. And I know that on behalf of all of us at Syracuse University, Reverend McKnight, we give you thanks to the cloud of witnesses that you've mentioned here this evening that have helped to not only to bring the BCCE where it is today, but to bring the university to where it is today. I want to thank you for your support of Hendricks Chapel and for your prayers and your support for myself and for our leadership team. Again, in the chapel and across the university. And we just really appreciate your time. So to all who have joined us this evening, we thank you. We are so grateful that you spent some time with us. Again, if you have questions, comments, please feel free to type them into the Facebook comments and we'll follow up with you. Reverend McKnight, as a colleague in ministry, I thank you for daring to embody the gospel. And as a fellow lover of Syracuse University, yes, please speak, please speak. I thought I was going to use the last word, but it looks like not.
Well, listen, BCCE and Hendricks Chapel, it's like this, heart and soul. But let me make this my final parting shot, and God bless you. I understand 3 years you've been there now. And God bless our administration, but be anxious for nothing, but in everything, through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, we will let our requests be made known to God, and the peace of God that passeth all understanding continues to guide our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. We are transformed by the renewing of our mind.
Amen. I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you, Reverend McKnight. Thank you all. Have a great night. God bless. Thank you.